Soccer is throughout the whole community on most of our flat fields. Cemetery, Bean, the high school, the middle school, Wilkins, Spalding. However, in the spring, what happens is you have two sports that have similar number of participants and similar hours of need for both practice and games on flat fields. And those two sports are soccer and lacrosse. How we do it when both fields are available, Cemetery and Bean, those are the primary fields that they use for both those sports in the spring, is that they alternate space. Practices will be held at Cemetery, practices will be held for soccer on the Bean fields, and practices for lacrosse will be on Cemetery fields. And for games, they switch. So then games are on Cemetery fields for lacrosse, and soccer games are on Bean. And what that does is it helps to equalize the use of the fields, because lacrosse is a sport that really takes a toll on turf.
So I guess I'm looking for, like, how many teams? How many teams are not going to be able to play on Cemetery fields? That's kind of what I was looking for.
I do have that. If you give me just a few minutes to find it, because
That's fine.
The other thing, just to add while she's looking, you had said private clubs versus Amherst residents, which actually was my question too. It turns out that the private clubs are in excess of 90% Amherst residents. It's just how they're organized. Instead of going through rec, they're private clubs, but they're all Amherst residents. It's just, there's not a difference between the two.
Well, there isn't funding, right?
Well, that's a good question. Does the private clubs, when they use the fields, and for that matter, the soccer tournaments and lacrosse, do they generate revenue for your department or the town?
You want to answer Nancy?
yes, they do.
But only from non-residents though, so.
Well,
in terms-
there's two ways in which we collect fees for our fields. One is through practice and games, and the other is through tournaments. For practice and games, the either recreation use or the private club's use only pay for non-residents. They do not pay a user fee for residents. For tournaments, they simply pay a flat fee, an hourly rate for the use of the fields. So that's the source of the revenue.
My point with the private clubs, I appreciate that the majority of the members of the private clubs are Amherst citizens. My point is, if we're speaking in terms of taxpayers' responsibilities, and it's a taxpayer's responsibility to fund our town's recreation, and it's not our responsibility to fund the private clubs. So that if, we're coming from this as, well, I'm coming from this as a taxpayer. So I want to be, I want to hear about how it impacts our city, our town's clubs and teams rather. It's not my job to make sure that the private clubs have funding.
Well, the reality is with the private clubs is most of the private clubs morphed out of recreation programs, and it was a decision, a mutual agreement by the Recreation Commission and other members of the town to form private clubs. Private clubs have been formed for soccer, lacrosse, and baseball. Maybe there's been more since then, I don't know. Baseball's moved back, and it's really an issue of organization, and it's the same kids whether the private club helps organize it or whether the Recreation Commission organizes it. So, and financially it's neutral because the few kids that play from out of town pay their share for the operating costs.
I'm on the board of the Amherst Patriots, and that's, a private club. We collect fees and dues for people to participate, for the youth to participate. And, at the end of the year, the bank account's pretty much empty. It's not like the clubs are not bankrolling this money. I mean, the Patriots pay an awful lot of money to the Hampshire Dome because we don't have, a field that we can practice on in the late summer, early fall season. So, you know, that's money that could be going to the town.
Andy, when you think about the private clubs, aren't they pretty much from public schools, not private schools?
Yeah, they're,
So aren't we serving kind of the community as a whole?
I think it's, as Bob Eaton said, I mean, it's just an organizational setup as opposed to, you know, as a decision was made, these are going to be run as a private club, and this is going to remain within RAC. You know, I don't really think you can distinguish between private clubs and RAC at this point. And also, you know, I wanted to just touch base on the two field warrant articles. You know, the first one was for Brewster Fields, right? And the town was up against significant flooding that year. I mean, you could barely get to the high school to vote that particular year. You had to go around a long way because the road was closed leading up there. And that's still a contention today. I mean, you know, Brad Knight's in the audience. He was at the planning board last night, still trying to figure out how can that be turned into a recreational area. And he's up against the same thing that we saw when that was a warrant article. It's a very motivated, very well-organized group of people that don't want that to happen. You know, the second was a completely different piece of land that was offered to the town by the state at a very good price. The town should have bought it simply as an investment purpose, but it would have cost a significant amount of money to develop that piece of land. It was heavily forested. There would have been a lot of work that would have had to go into that. Subsequently, a private investor bought it, and I believe they put it in a retirement home?
Housing. It's all housing.
Housing. Good for the taxpayers.
No, it's not.
No.
Housing, you forget, housing costs the town money.
Kids in schools.
I've got a couple of things I wanted to ask about. I apologize if the first issue was already discussed before I arrived. I thought we started at 7:30. Something that has not been discussed since I arrived at, right, is the question about the original intent of the transaction when the property on Merrimack Road was transferred to the town for the purpose of having that be cemetery. And the town purchased it, presumably in good faith, that was going to be dedicated for that purpose. And it seems like, from what I'm hearing, everyone is either ignoring that or has already gone past it somehow and resolved it somehow so that it doesn't matter anymore. But it strikes me that the trustees are not, the cemetery trustees, are not only adhering to the fiduciary duty to maintain the trust and make sure that it's being protected, but also trying to adhere to the original intent of the purchase of the property. So I'd like to hear some comment on that, unless maybe I misunderstand what was originally done.
No, tonight we were sort of trying to not look at the past so much, but look at the future. But that's a pretty easy question to answer. I mean, if you look at the purchase and sale, clearly states recreational use. I mean, really, there were only two stipulations that it was sold. That it wouldn't come under the management of the Conservation Committee in town, and that a fence would be erected. So both those stipulations have been met. So
where did this concept that it was intended to be
because
cemetery property,
it was
where did that
purchased,
come from?
it was purchased with cemetery trust money, so it was recreation and cemetery at such time as it's needed. So.
Right.
Brad, is that
Well, I was going
correct?
to say Bob was a selectman, and I would think he would know because you were actually there. Wasn't sure.
Well, the cemetery, it was purchased with money from cemetery trusts by the cemetery trustees, and with certainly the intention that at some point it would be used, or part of it would be used as a cemetery. But there's no legal requirement for that.
No, and as far as I know, there isn't. But
And there's
my
nothing in the
understanding-
purchase and sales agreement or in the deed itself that mandates that, or even addresses it.
Wasn't that the motivation for the seller, that it was going to be dedicated
Well,
for a cemetery plan? That's why he was willing to sell it to the cemetery trustees.
Well, he's not around, so
Right, but
it's,
I-
you know, what's legally counts is what's in the the warranty deed.
Okay, but it also counts that the town honor its commitments I mean, if in the future, people have an interest in trying to bequest property to the town or
Well,
sell it at
usually
any rate,
when people do that,
and they don't believe that the town's gonna stick to the agreement, then they're not gonna be doing it.
well, the reality is when people want to do that, they put it in the agreement.
Well,
Anytime the Conservation Commission gets land, it has a conservation easement in it, so they can't do anything else with it. And this land does not have any restrictions.
what I understand from everything that I've read about this whole issue, that the families that were involved that had original ownership of the property and transferred, their understanding is that that's what the property is supposed to be used for. And
They were very shrewd people that sold a lot of land, and they would have, if they were adamant about that. I've looked at a lot of documentation on this, and I knew the Merrills, they're friends of my family. If I for a minute thought that we were overstepping, if that could be documented, that makes it a whole different issue, but I don't, nothing exists, and he sold that land previously, and then got it back into foreclosure, and it's going to be a horse farm or retirement community. So, you know, I don't think the intent stands up. I mean, I think he owned large portions of Amherst at different points in time.
sure did. And I understand he was a shrewd businessman and probably wouldn't have done something just without thinking it through and understanding it.
You've got fair market value for the land. And
My point is that it's been my understanding, I think for a lot of the public, and it's been mentioned in newspaper articles and whatnot, that this was the intent of the transaction. And yet, that seems to have been kind of tossed by the wayside, and now it's a matter of trying to, parties who are interested in using the correct property are using whatever means they can come up with to try to kind of force the trustees off of their position. So that we can apparently see it as a reasonable solution from your perspective, and it may be, but it's not appear to be reasonable to the trustees based on their understanding of their responsibilities and commitments. But this kind of leads to my second point, and I'm almost done anyway. Is that the petition warrant article for essentially dissolving the cemetery trustees and putting the selectmen in that position, isn't that just going to take the hats off of the existing trustees, put those hats onto the selectmen, and they're going to have the exact same responsibilities to the trust that the trustees have?
yeah,
So the selectmen are going to be, in fact, possibly put into a position of having a real conflict. Because they're going to be obligated to maintain the fiduciary responsibility toward the trust, and yet,
but they can do that probably better than not doing something by selling a toxic asset that really has no value, restore the trust and fund the cemetery.
I think that's a debatable point. So I don't think it's a wise approach. And at any rate, that's my opinion.
Did you have something you wanted to say?
I was just going to ask Bob, because there have been a lot of things, sometimes 180 degrees apart, especially if you're going back talking about what did or didn't occur in 1990. So I was going to ask, and so one of the things that I had heard, but have since gotten additional information on, is that the property was actually sold to the town as a discount. And I was going to ask you if you knew it was sold at above.
No, the land was appraised and purchased at the appraised value.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think contrary to what people were saying, I think the purchase and sales is incredibly clear about the use of the land in the verbiage of the original purchase and sales. I mean, it should be used for cemetery use, but that dual use as deemed fit by the town, including recreation, but not conservation, would be agreeable to the purchase and sale terms up and until it's needed for cemetery use. And I think there's the thing that I think we've gotten away from as a town is, again, look back 10 years from now, the town was very unified in that concept of using it for recreational use and having this duality of use. And even a letter from Mr. Merrill himself, when there was a proposal to expand the land, showed that he still was in favor of use of it as recreation use, even back then, as long as there was no conservation, and interestingly enough, as long as there were no rockets being fired. So, I don't think any of what we're discussing is out of the context of the original use of the land, for two reasons. One, there is no imminent use or need for the cemetery space, and there still is obvious need for the recreation space. So that was the original intent of the land, for it to be used that way. So I don't think we're straying far from that. And I think when we talk about how taking the responsibilities to the Board of Selectmen, I don't think any of us really who believe in the process of what's going on want to force the issue of saying, yes, this is exactly how we're going to use the land. We just want the Amherst public to have a vote, so that we're having the town and everyone have a chance to weigh in. And I think that's the only mechanism of which we can do it. And unless we can have the trustees agree to bring that decision to the town itself. Thanks.
I guess that's my question. Mine's Chris Lupus. Not a lifelong resident of Amherst, lifelong resident of New Hampshire, only 26 years in Amherst. I guess my question, I'm not a lawyer, and I'm definitely not a finance guy. I do appreciate all the effort, and I do respect everyone's opinion. And I'd like to say, I'm sorry, Brad, I don't know you, but I think you've done a wonderful job of succinctly saying, here's where we're at. Because we can spend a lot of time on the legal ramifications. We can spend a lot of time on the financial ramifications. We can debate on the peripheries, what did Mr. Merrill want? We can debate if we really need the space or if we don't need the space for recreation. And everybody's going to have an opinion on that. I have an 11-year-old daughter. I love her dearly. I had to turn my lights on in my car to have her play soccer. Okay, I got proof that I really think we need it. I get that everybody here may not have that opinion. I try to explain it to my 11-year-old daughter, like my dad said to me. And I'm sorry, I can't explain it because there are lots of people that are raising some kind of reasonable things. This gentleman just said, I get we need to go out and vote, I get that. Is that really the only way? Not that the vote, not to have our vote heard, I will get my vote out and I will do that, absolutely. Is that the only way that we can just evaluate potential options? That's the only way? And that's my question. Really, we got to remove these guys. I respect them dearly. I'm sorry that their legacy is going to be so tarnished because they've done a long time serving the town. Sorry that 50 years from now, that's the way they're going to be remembered if this goes down the wrong way. But is that the only way we can do this? I don't know the answer, and I know we're out of time, but if that's the only thing, then okay, we'll get them out to vote. But really, we can't even look at a different use or different property for the, we can't even talk about it?
We've tried.
I know, but I guess that's my question. So if you guys all feel, guys and women, sorry. My wife.
Persons.
People of both genders. If that's really, is that really the only choice? If you say yes, then I'll shut up. Go kiss my daughter.
Yeah, unfortunately, yes. We've got, I told them to get out of here by 9.
Okay, so we are up against the time limit here.
I'll be quick because now we're getting close to beating a dead horse here.
Yeah.
you know, the folks, in my opinion, who are the cemetery trustees, are doing one thing, upholding the law. So if you disagree with the law, then have the law changed. They're upholding the law. So just really quickly, Bob Keating, I thought I was going to fall over dead when you said that even though the cemeteries were bought with cemetery funds, they don't have to be cemeteries. Yeah, they do, or we wouldn't be here.
That's not what I said.
Okay.
Folks,
So-
let's not
All
attack
right,
each other.
so I'm just going to read you, I have this, it is dated August 12, 1996. It is from the lawyer for Jovina Merrill, who was Mrs. Merrill. And I'm just going to read 2 sentences for clarification on the history of cemetery fields and where it came from. Mrs. Merrill wishes me to place on record her opposition to the use of cemetery field for other than practice athletic uses. Such use of the land for practice fields was what was represented to Mr. and Mrs. Merrill at the time they agreed to the conveyance. The Merrill's agreement was made with the knowledge that use of the practice fields would involve fewer changes on the land itself and less impact on the neighboring landowners. So there it is. That's what their wishes were way back then. Nothing more than some practice fields.
That sounds like basically what we're delivering.
Well,
Yeah,
I think we're descending into rancor here, so let's not do that. So I'm glad that we've had this discussion. I'm glad that we've gotten a lot of different views aired. I don't know if there's any closing statements that the panelists would like to make. Up to you guys. So thank you all for coming tonight. Hopefully we can find some way to move forward.